Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a fascinating tug of war right at the very heart of English football. It's a sport that's historically wrestled with its own identity, constantly caught between this rugged, physical grit on one hand and sophisticated, tactical genius on the other. By unpacking the book Get It Kicked, alongside some historical archives and modern tactical breakdowns, we're going to uncover how sheer crises on the pitch forced some absolutely incredible innovations. We'll see how the very DNA of English football was shaped not just by those glorious trophy-lifting victories, but by spectacular failures and the visionary minds that had to respond to them. Let's start with a genuinely bizarre piece of history. Early football? It was basically a brutal, chaotic mob game. When the Football Association first met back in 1863 to unify the laws, purists like Francis Maud Campbell literally argued to keep shin hacking legal. I'm not kidding. He actually claimed that without hacking, a team of Frenchmen could beat them with just a week's practice. It is wild to think that the beautiful game started with intense debates over whether you should be allowed to deliberately kick your opponent's legs. To trace how we went from bloody shins to brilliant strategies, here is our roadmap. First, from mob rule to rules. Second, Chapman's WM formation revolution. Third, the Hungarian wake-up call. Fourth, Alf Ramsey's pragmatic 4-4-2. And finally, number 5, echoes in modern football.
Section 1. From mob rule to rules. Let's see how this sport built itself up from a totally chaotic free-for-all into a highly structured, tactical game. Now, what's really fascinating is how specific rule changes, especially the massive 1925 offside adjustment, fundamentally forced tactical evolution. Under the old 1866 rules, an attacker needed 3 opponents between them and the goal to be considered onside. But by the 1920s, clever teams had completely figured out how to exploit this to their advantage.
The crucial point is that before 1925, teams weaponized the offside rule to absolutely kill the game's excitement. They'd use just 2 defenders, one swept at the back, while the other quickly stepped up to trap the attackers offside. This led to a massive drop in goals, totally boring matches, and a desperate demand for a solution. So in 1925, the FA changed the rule, requiring only 2 defenders for a player to be onside. Instantly, boom, a huge goal glut. But of course, this new attacking freedom desperately demanded a brand new defensive response.
Moving to Section 2, Chapman's WM formation revolution. Enter Herbert Chapman, the visionary manager of Huddersfield Town and later Arsenal, who completely transformed how the game was played in response to those new rules. Chapman's genius was absolutely game-changing. He totally scrapped the old 2-3-5 formation to create a solid defensive base that was capable of lightning-fast counterattacks. By pulling the roaming center half back into a dedicated stopper position and pushing the fullbacks out wide, he created a robust 3-man backline. The shape literally formed the letters W and M on the pitch. It was an incredibly organized machine that honestly changed football forever.
Chapman realized something profound here. Drawing out the opposition actually creates the perfect space for lethal counters. He noted that the absolute best time to score is immediately after repelling an attack because the opponents are all strung out in the wrong half of the field. By cleverly playing deep, intentionally inviting that pressure, and basically laying a trap, Chapman led Arsenal to total dominance in the 1930s. His counter-attacking style was completely at odds with the traditional English focus on dribbling and endless possession. But you see, Chapman wasn't just a tactician on the grass. He modernized the very fabric of the game itself. He was decades ahead of his time, and he was an incredibly cunning operator too. He once secretly poured rival directors real gin and tonics while he just drank pure water, all to negotiate a lower transfer fee for star player David Jack. Talk about getting a competitive edge, right? From introducing floodlights and installing the famous Highbury clock to demanding strict physical fitness regimes, he approached football with a true engineer's mind.
Section 3. The Hungarian wake-up call. As Chapman's successful system became unquestioned dogma over the next few decades, English football kind of just stopped innovating. Managers simply copied the WM without really understanding the dynamic principles behind it, and this static stubbornness set the perfect stage for a brutal reality check.
So, the Hungarians show up at Wembley in 1953 wearing these strange, lightweight boots, which the English players initially mocked. Well, the joke was on them. The Magical Magyars completely dismantled an English team that arrogantly assumed they were unbeatable on home soil. Up until that point, England had never been beaten by a non-British team at Wembley. They were expecting a comfortable demolition,
Instead, they got a tactical masterclass that entirely shattered their insular worldview. The contrast in movement here is stark. The Hungarians moved their players around like puzzle pieces, totally exposing the rigid, somewhat anti-intellectual stubbornness that had infected the English DNA. For example, while English center-halves were strictly used to marking a traditional stationary center-forward, the Hungarian striker Nandor Hedekuti kept dropping deep into the midfield. The English defenders were lost. They didn't know whether to follow him and leave a huge gap at the back or stay put and just let him dictate the play. It resulted in a humiliating 6-3 defeat, which was then followed by an even worse 7-1 thrashing in Budapest just a year later.
Section 4. Alf Ramsey's Pragmatic 4-4-2. Shamed by these massive international failures, England desperately needed a pragmatic savior, and they found one in the cold, meticulous, and ruthlessly organized Alf Ramsey. Ramsey brought a tactical revolution that completely sacrificed those beautiful dribbling wingers in favor of hard-running, versatile midfielders. He created what became known as the 4-4-2. He utilized players like Alan Ball and Martin Peters, guys who would tirelessly track back into the midfield the second possession was lost. And it worked. This demanding, incredibly tight system famously led England to win the 1966 World Cup on home soil.
But what's really fascinating is just how divisive this victory actually was. While Ramsey undoubtedly brought glory, critics argue that he permanently sucked the joy and creativity right out of English football. Historian Frank McLean even called him a humorless bore who relied on simply exhausting the opposition through mass defense. To his detractors, Ramsey cemented a culture of cautious, defensive-minded football that always prioritized work rate over flair.
This tension perfectly captures the eternal debate that has haunted the country's footballing psyche ever since. Think about it. Do you embrace the rugged English DNA of extreme physical effort, heart, and courage? Or do you try to mimic the sophisticated finesse, technical skill, and fluid passing triangles of continental and South American football? For decades, English managers were caught right in the middle, forced to choose between valuing the working-class doer and the deep-thinking tactician.
That brings us to Section 5, Echoes in Modern Football. Let's look at how this rich tactical history is remarkably repeating itself today. Because, you might think the tactics of the 1920s have absolutely nothing to do with today's elite game, but you'd be very mistaken.
It turns out Chapman's 1920s geometry is back in style. The modern 3-2-2-3 box midfield, which is famously used by top managers today, actually acts as the foundation for modern hyper-complex possession football. Teams are literally mirroring those exact same positional shifts. They push the fullbacks wide, drop a midfielder down, and create this rock-solid base to overload the middle and stifle any counterattacks. It's fast, it's fluid, and amazingly, it's built on a 100-year-old blueprint.
Looking at modern tactical breakdowns, the instant possession is lost. Teams execute very specific steps to shift their entire shape. For example, a modern out-of-possession shift requires a player to drop down and quickly become a center back, reforming a solid back four. You need holding midfielders who can absorb immense pressure, and versatile players who can drop back to defend just as well as they attack. Basically, it requires players who possess both the relentless physical grit of Alf Ramsey's 1966 squad and the extreme technical ability that those Hungarians displayed back in 1953.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought. The history of this sport isn't just a list of scores or rule changes. It's quite literally a century-long argument over its very soul. So is it about outworking your opponent with sheer grit, or is it about outthinking them with tactical genius? Ultimately, the greatest teams figure out how to do both. Keep that in mind the next time you sit down to watch a fiercely contested match. Thanks for joining me today, and keep questioning the tactics behind the beautiful game.